Hey, what's up, guys? How are you all doing? Hope you're doing well this past couple of months or so. This channel, this month, as of recording this in February, is turning 5 years old. Can you believe that? I've already been doing YouTube for 5 years now. And over these past 5 years, made a lot of episodes. Some of them were pretty good, some of them not so great, but, it was still fun doing it. Even though by the time you are probably seeing this video, I'm still on break. If you don't know, I left the internet for a while. I still figured I can't really skip out on this. This is such a monumental moment in channel's history. And plus, I just miss doing YouTube in general. It's been a really fun hobby. It's hard to let it go after 5 years, even if it's just temporarily. So, I'm making a video. Why the hell not? It's gonna be fun. I've got a cool idea for you guys today. We're going to be talking about my favorite video game of all time, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Oh my goodness, what a game this is. By far, like I said, by far my favorite video game I've ever played. After all these years, playing games since I was just a little boy, I've never played a game quite like Symphony of the Night. And while reviewing Symphony of the Night is kind of a task that I could never hope to tackle, what about doing an original idea about the game that, as far as I know, nobody has done before, and that is taking every location in Dracula's castle and ranking it from worst to best. I have a bunch of notes here. I've already ranked the areas by now. It's all in a list here. I've already got it sorted out, and let me tell you, it was really, really fucking hard getting this list together, because at the end of the day, there's not really many bad areas in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. For the most part, they're all very good, with maybe just some minor flaws in them. Maybe it has a weak boss fight, or maybe there's not that many good items. But for the most part, they're all fun to play. But with that said, there are some areas that I do think are objectively bad, even if maybe some of them I do have fun playing through. So these bottom few picks are actually kind of bad, I will admit. But with the intro out of the way, we don't need to talk about this anymore. We might as well get into the list right now. With that said, we'll take our lovable blonde edgelord who has daddy issues, Alucard, and let's go explore some of these areas and see which ones kind of weak, which ones are kind of good. Now, starting off with what I believe is by far the worst area in Symphony of the Night, and that is the reverse mine, or as the game likes to call it, just cave. And you can tell just based on the name being cave that they didn't put a whole lot of effort into this area. It has the same exact music as the regular abandoned mine. The enemies that you'll find here are actually reused from very early parts in Symphony of the Night, and by this point, they're not doing any damage. They're very weak, they die in one hit, so there's absolutely zero challenge in this area. They take Slogra and Gaibun, the first boss in the game, and reuse it here, and even on a no armor run, they do 8 damage. Besides that, there is a boss fight here with Death himself, and usually these are the highlight boss fights in Castlevania games. Death fights usually never disappoint, but this one unfortunately kind of does. If you limit yourself, if you use bad weapons or don't use any armor, if you're playing it in a challenge run, it can be kind of interesting. But at the end of the day, he just has too little HP to pose much of a challenge. For the most part, you can just tank through it. In fact, I was able to beat him with the red rust. I'm not kidding. I beat this guy with a rusted fucking red pipe that I found in Dracula's shit sewers. So yeah, just a very disappointing death fight, and a very weak area overall. Our next area is the reverse outer wall, which is like the abandoned mine. It's mostly filler. There's no unique enemies. There's actually zero good drops in this area. You don't find any cool weapons or armor or any decent items here. Um, it's almost exclusively just the place that takes you to the Forbidden Library to get the Chrysogrim. This is also the point in the video where you will start hearing the final toccata music track, and this plays a lot in the Inverted Castle. You will be hearing this music quite a bit throughout this video. It is disappointing to hear the final toccata here. It just removes any possible personality that could be found in this area. And the cherry on top is also the boss fight here, being maybe the worst boss fight in the game, called the Creature, and I'm sorry, this guy just poses no challenge. So the reverse outer wall, there's no redeeming qualities here, it's just pretty bad. Our next area is the Reverse Castle Keep, which is notable for not being notable at all. There's almost no enemies here. There's maybe one guy who kind of kicks his head around like a skeleton dude. There's no really great items here. Same music as the regular Castle Keep. There's no boss fight. It's not good. I guess there is one decent drop here, and that's the Sword of Dawn, but it's not a great weapon and will very quickly be replaced. So again, pretty bad area. Alright, so at this point we're kind of transitioning from the bad areas to the halfway decent, got some redeeming qualities. These areas aren't that bad to play, and we'll start off this section with the Abandoned Pit to the Catacomb. This is the regular version of the reverse mine that we talked about earlier, and there's at least some unique enemies, unique music, you know, it feels original. It's a very small area, unfortunately. There are some pretty nice items that you can find here. The Ring of Ares in particular is one of the best accessories in Symphony of the Night, which is very nice. Power of Sire is also a great use item, and the combat knife might be the best weapon you can find in the regular castle. So, in terms of drops, this place is very, very good. Unfortunately, it's just, there's not a whole lot of fun factor. The enemies don't really strike me as anything notable. There is a boss fight here against the Hellhound, which is pretty entertaining, and he's got some interesting fireball attacks, but he's very easily cheesable by just ducking and attacking, so unfortunately it's one of the weaker boss fights. So not a horrible area, but definitely the weakest in the regular castle. Alright, here we have one of the Saturn exclusive areas, and in my opinion this is the weakest one of the lot, and that is the Soul Prison, which is the reversed version of the Cursed Prison. Again, it's got some stuff going for it. There is some good music. I really like the song that plays here. There are some new enemies, and especially the Grim Reaper looking guy with like the big hands. That guy was really cool. That was a fun enemy to fight. The real problem with this area is that there's really no reason to visit. No good items here. It doesn't really take you anywhere interesting. And it's also extremely small, so it's just pretty unmemorable in the long run. There's a couple of cool enemies, but that's mostly about it. Alright, this next one on the list might be kind of a hot take. Here we have the entrance, which is the opening area to Symphony of the Night. I know it is kind of memorable for it being the first, and especially when you first walk in with the wind and the thunder going off. It is a very memorable opening, but after that, there's almost nothing really remarkable about this place. There's very few enemies, which makes sense, you know, for the opening area. And of course, it's also just very small as well, so to me, it's just kind of forgettable past the opening first couple of hallways. But still, though, it's pretty fun. I'm not gonna knock this area too hard. It's still pretty good. Now, next up on the list is actually the reverse entrance, which I think, by just a small margin, is better than the regular entrance. And that's mostly just because there's more of a fun factor. with there being more challenging enemies. I mean, this place is actually pretty tough at points, especially the first few hallways, going through the room with the bone dragons and the werewolves. If you actually kill the small little guy on top of the bone dragons, the bone dragon itself will fight for you, which is a really interesting idea. Unfortunately, it does use the final toccata music again, which, like I said before, kind of removes any personality from the area. And overall, there's not a real great reason to visit, except for one item, and that is the rune sword, which you can get from these dodo birds here. It is kind of a low percent drop chance, so good luck getting it, but it is a fantastic weapon, which definitely bumps this place up over the original entrance, at least in my opinion. Alright, next we have the Cursed Prison, which is another Saturn exclusive area. And to be honest, this place does make a very good first impression if you enter through it in the Marble Gallery. There's some very interesting new enemies, such as ghosts that can only be killed with holy weapons, which I don't think is done for any other enemy in Symphony of the Night, which is, of course, very unique. But when you go through the first hallway, there's a barrier, and you'll have to trigger the switch on the other side. And that means you come back to the area a little bit later through the underground caverns. And this is where the area starts to get kind of bland. We mostly see spear guards, which by that point we've already seen them before, so it's not very interesting. You go left, you go right, there's no branching paths, there's one save point. There is one pretty good drop here, and that is the Astral Dagger. Again, it's just a very nice weapon for the regular castle, and can probably take you into the reverse castle as well. It's just that good. Pretty fun area, great first hallway, but otherwise kind of underwhelming. Alright, next we have Deathwing's Lair, the reversed version of Ulrox's quarters, which I'll tell you right now, we're going to see Ulrox's quarters way higher up on the list. Per usual, final toccata is the theme here. Removes personality, yada yada, you get the idea. There are some pretty nice and creative new enemies here, such as the Malachi demon dude, which flings a massive projectile, as well as, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that. He's a big dude with a sword, yeah. One of the hardest regular enemies in Symphony of the Night. So there's some new enemies here that are interesting. There's also some decent finds here, like the Dark Shield. There is a boss fight in this area, and unfortunately, again, it's one of the worst boss fights in Symphony of the Night. It's just, it's a mummy. I don't know what to say. He's wrapped in fucking toilet paper, and you know how easy it is to break toilet paper? And it translates well into Symphony of the Night, because this guy, he falls apart if you breathe on him. He's pathetic. So, unfortunately, that brings Deathwing's Lair considerably further down on the list. Alright, next up on our list is the Castle Keep, which is the very top of Dracula's castle. And it's alright. It's okay. I mean, there's not many enemies here. It's kind of small. You get some okay things, such as the Power of Mist, which is really good, and the Fire Mail is also okay. But the thing that really carries this area is the boss fight with Richter, which is excellent. One of the better boss fights in the game, so that really brings it much higher on the list, because otherwise, it's got some nice atmosphere and mystery with it being the area that Richter fought Dracula in the prologue, but you can't go up there yet, so it's like, man, I want to see what's over there, and it is worth the hype because Richter is there, so pretty good. Alright, the Hell Garden is next, the reverse version of the Underground Garden in the Saturn version of Symphony of the Night, and I like this area. This is one of the better ones, one of the better Saturn exclusive areas in Symphony of the Night. I really like the music here, the remix of Beginning from Castlevania 3. There are some cool new enemies here. There's this dude that breathes fire all over the place. There's these weird looking night dudes that kind of look like they're from Dark Souls. I know making a Dark Souls comparison is kind of getting old and stale, but honestly, the resemblance is there. And at the very end of this area, there's a very difficult hallway, but it is worth it to get the Alucard Spear, which is a Saturn exclusive weapon. The same weapon that Eric Lecard uses in Bloodlines, which is dope. Alucard doesn't know how to fucking swing the thing. You're supposed to thrust it, my man. It's your own fucking spear. You don't swing it like a sword. It's not a big deal, alright? But it's a very nice weapon. So, worth visiting this place for sure, just for the spear. I also gotta say, I really like the trippy background graphics in this area. There's kind of an eerie mystique to it. Like, what is going on back there? Is that like a portal to hell or something like that? It looks kind of cool. Unfortunately, the thing that really brings this area down is that there's no boss fight. The underground garden, which we're going to cover a little bit later, has a boss fight, and this is just an empty room with the spear, so that's unfortunate. But other than that, I actually kind of like this area. Alright, next up is the reverse clock tower, which, yeah, it's alright. It's got some pretty creative level design, specifically when you first enter with the room with the falling spike traps and the bomb armors. That's a pretty nice room. That's one of the more memorable areas in the inverted castle. This place just gets really annoying in the midway point with the cloaked knights. That's what they're called, right? The cloaked knights. They're everywhere. They just throw them all over the place, and you just get bounced around, and it can be kind of frustrating. This area has some of the best drops in Symphony of the Night. The Heaven Sword can be found from the Cloaked Knights, which is one of the best weapons in the game. Unfortunately, a very low drop rate, and you have to get 2 of them to get the cool special attack, so it's very hard to get it, but it's an excellent weapon. Really good. The Moon Rod is also here, which you just find. You don't have to grind for it, and it's also a very nice weapon with a great secondary attack, which launches these projectiles that are behind Alucard. And the Dragon Helm is, of course, one of the best accessories in the game. It reduces enemy defense. Kind of speaks for itself. And finally, you're hearing it right now. Yep, Final Toccata. Again, you're hearing that a lot, like I said. The boss fight is unfortunately really bad. You know, that's a theme for these areas that are on the lower half, is that the boss fights can be pretty bad. But it's pretty fun. Not a bad start to the inverted castle. And some great finds here as well. Alright, next up we have the Forbidden Library. And this area is most notable for it being the place where you get the Chrysogrim. So I feel like a lot of people are familiar with this spot because you have to harvest schmooze and then you finally find the Chrysogrim, and at that point all challenge just gets zapped away from Symphony of the Night. I personally don't get the Chrysogrim much anymore just because I like the game being at least somewhat challenging at points, yeah. But I still like going to this place sometimes just for the Fist of Tulkas, which is a much more balanced weapon than the Chrysogrim, and it's still very fun with plenty of special moves that you can do, so that's also a nice find. The layout itself contains quite a few cool new enemies. Unfortunately, they're rather easy, so that's kind of a lame side effect of it. They're not very challenging, kind of easy to dodge attacks, and low HP. But they're still pretty fun and creative. This is also the first area on the list that has the iconic theme, Lost Painting, which speaks for itself. I'll play it right here, Lost Painting, it's excellent. And one of the main things that kind of brings this area down is that there isn't a boss fight. Like I said with the Hell Garden, the regular version had a boss fight, and now the boss room is empty, which is just unfortunate. Just makes it a little less memorable than some of the other areas, but pretty fun, not bad. It's got some good drops, you know, overall, pretty good. Alright, next up is the final Saturn exclusive area. This is, in my opinion, the best one, and that is the Underground Garden. This area is very skippable because there's actually 0 good drops here, but it is a very fun diversion. The Underground Garden definitely succeeds at the fun factor. First of all, it's got a bangin' music track. Excellent music rendition of Vampire Killer. Great listen here, one of my favorites from the Saturn exclusive songs. But most importantly, this section of the game has a very good boss fight. This is the only boss fight that is in these Saturn exclusive areas, and that is the Skeleton Leader. It's almost like the Doppelganger, where it's like a DPS race, because he does heavy damage, but he also doesn't have a lot of HP. So you have to sometimes go wild on him. It's a battle to the death here. It's very entertaining, and overall, pretty fun diversion. Just, you can kind of skip it if you want to, because there's no finds here. You get nothing. I'll say it outright. There's no finds here. You get no good loot. But overall, pretty good. Alright, next up we have the Clock Tower, which might be kind of a hot take. I know a lot of people like this area. In my opinion, it's one of the weaker ones in the regular castle. But to start off, right off the bat, it has a banging tune with Tragic Prince, one of the better songs in Symphony of the Night. The level design here can be pretty challenging, especially trying to dodge the Medusa heads, and the Valkyries can be pretty damaging. They do quite a bit of damage, so watch out. This is also an area you can skip into kind of early, as long as you have the wolf. It is very difficult to do it because the collapsing bridges will give you a run for your money, but it is possible, and it will give you a much greater challenge, which makes it more fun in my opinion. With that said, while the level design can be challenging, it can also be really frustrating. Like I said, the Medusa heads, man, they can be pretty goddamn annoying here, especially when you're trying to click those goddamn gears. The boss fight, unfortunately, kind of sucks. I'm just gonna say it, it's not very good. You can stun lock him infinitely, which, you know, that's a problem in a game, you know, where you're supposed to have challenging boss fights. Just saying, you know, it's got problems, but the fun factor is there. I especially like the area with the sword lords, and you have to jump on top of the clock hands. That part's pretty fun. The collapsing bridges is really creative, because you have to, you know, watch out for that. You might get knocked into the collapsing bridges by the skulls. You know, that part's pretty cool, but overall it's pretty flawed, and that's why it's kind of lower on the list. Alright, next up is the Black Marble Gallery, which I guess to me and most others, that's going to be the final area you go through in Symphony of the Night. It's kind of the end game because you fight Drac here. I really wish they didn't use Final Toccata here, because it really doesn't make it feel like the final area. I know it's called Final Toccata, but it feels like just any other inverted castle area. But it is very challenging. They do kind of nail the challenge a little bit with the Nova Skeletons in kind of interesting spots where you have like the little spike traps, and then you have the Jacko bones. It can be kind of difficult to get through those challenges. In the room with the Guardians are really tough to kill. So that's also a very interesting enemy, because they do a ton of damage, man. Just a shit ton of damage. So it is a tough area, which is nice. The Dracula fight is also very good. You technically fight Drac in the Black Marble Gallery, so I'm including that as the boss fight. And Dracula is very good in this game. He's got a good boss battle. Unfortunately, this area just has some issues that brings it down. There's also no great drops here, except for the God's Garb, which is one of the best armor sets in Symphony of the Night. But, you know, you have to grind from a Guardian. You know, good luck doing that. It's just too hard to get. So, pretty flawed, but not bad overall.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Alright, next up on our list is the Necromancy Laboratory. Now, one of the best things about this area is that it has amazing drops, amazing finds, great loot here. You have the Ring of Varda, which increases the chance to get a rare weapon or item from an enemy, which, you know, if you're trying to get the Heaven Sword, this is like a must-have. You can also get the Goddess Shield here, which I don't quite remember what it does in combination with the Shield Rod, but it's not bad. The Marcel is one of my favorite weapons in Symphony of the Night. I get this thing almost every run because it's just so fun to use. It's a fire sword. This area also has a pretty good boss fight against Beelzebub. It presents a very unique challenge during that fight, which is just reaching the guy and not getting hit by flies. There's also a risk and reward factor here with the poison, because you can get poisoned here, which will make you take a lot more damage. But you can continue attacking, because it takes a while for the poison to go away, but risk taking a shit ton of damage from the flies, or you can try and wait it out. So there is some decision making here. It's a fun boss fight. Unfortunately, the area itself is kind of unremarkable. There's not a ton of fun factor here. It can be kind of annoying with the bitter flies coming at you, and the Salem witches are reused here from the regular abandoned mine. Again, just kind of feels like filler. So the area itself is kind of unremarkable with a lot of reused enemies and not many interesting challenges. It's got some ups, it's got some downs. Pretty good area though. Alright, this one might be a real big hot take, putting it down this low on the list. And it's not even that low, we're almost in the top 10 here. But some people, this is their favorite area, and that is the underground caverns. Now, there are some really nice things about this area, but it's also got some problems as well, and I'll go through them. First of all, in terms of music, yeah, you can't go wrong here with Crystal Teardrop. One of the better songs in Symphony of the Night. I'm not complaining there, that's a great song. There's a lot of new enemies here as well. You got like frogs and these little ice elemental things. I don't know what they're called. I'll put it up on screen here. There's these little bone fish things that shoot fire at you. There's a lot of enemies here. There are 2 boss fights here in the underground caverns. The first one is excellent. It's against this worm dog chick thing. I don't really know what this is exactly, but it's very fun in the chaos that it brings. It's like a war of attrition here, where there's so many projectiles coming at you. The challenge is getting in. The second boss fight against the succubus is, yeah, it's dog water. It's not good. Here's the thing about Symphony of the Night. The boss fights are either amazing or bad. There's usually no in between. Some of the better ones are just incredible, and some of the bad ones are just laughable. So, again, there's no real in-between here. Unfortunately, there's some other problems as well. In my opinion, the area is just a little bit too big for the amount of stuff here. You don't really get a whole lot of great stuff, and it's a lot of walking and a lot of waiting on boats and stuff. It's just a little bit too big for me. And finally, it's also incredibly easy, so you won't find a whole lot of challenge here. It's one of the easier areas in the game, in my opinion. But it's still good. Don't get me wrong, guys. It's still a good area. Don't crucify me, okay? I see the pitchforks. Put them away. Let's go over the next area on our list, and that is the long library. I think at this point, this is where areas start to get exceptional, in my opinion. The long library is very good. I wasn't expecting it to be this high up on the list, to be honest. But it's there, and it's actually, there's not a whole lot of problems with this area. It's got good music, there's a ton of creative and new enemies here. In terms of loot, this is probably the best area in Symphony of the Night. You get the fairy scroll, which allows you to see the names of enemies. You get the fairy card, which is a relic or familiar, which follows around Alucard and helps him out. The Holy Rod, which is very good against bosses like Olrox. And the shop, don't forget the shop. The shop alone makes it, again, the most valuable area in Symphony of the Night in terms of loot. The first half of it is kind of easy, unfortunately. I mean, a lot of areas in Symphony of the Night are easy, but this one is really, really easy, so... But in the second half, it makes up for it with these flea men, which can be annoying, just like the Medusa heads in the clock tower, but it is more challenging, so I can't complain too much. And the boss fight is, again, hate to say it, it kind of blows. it's a lot more fun if you skip into this area early and fight him. So the boss fight kind of stinks. That kind of brings it down a lot, but overall, exceptional area. Just a great one overall. Very memorable. Alright, next up is the Alchemy Laboratory. This is basically the tutorial area to Symphony of the Night. I know the entrance comes first, but this is the first spot where you really start to see enemies, and there's real danger. You find your first boss fight here, and it's a great start. It is a really good start to Symphony of the Night. Excellent, excellent area. The theming of it is very unique with the whole laboratory aesthetic. That is pretty nice. It's beautiful graphically. The whole game is beautiful graphically, but I really like how this area looks. There is a weapon stash that you can access by flying up through this ceiling here, which makes this area worth revisiting if you want to get a specific sub-weapon. And the boss fight here is pretty decent against Slagra and Gaibun. They're pretty easy, which makes sense for the first boss fight, but they're interesting. You know, you got kind of an overwhelming odds type of deal with, I mean, it's 1v2, so. And as a kid, these guys kicked my ass, man. I mean, now I'm doing the exact opposite. These guys, you know, I'll just like stab them a couple times and they go down. But as a kid, they really knocked me around. So, is there really any flaws to this area? Not really. In my opinion, it's just kind of outclassed by later areas on this list. In terms of style, in terms of interesting, creative level design and enemies, I think it's just outpaced later, which makes sense. You don't want to go all out for the like tutorial area pretty much. But overall, excellent start to the game. Anyway, after leaving the Alchemy Laboratory, you will enter the Marble Gallery, which is the next area on our list. And this follows a very similar theme to the Alchemy Laboratory. There's a lot of good things about it. It's very beautiful, in my opinion, one of the best looking areas in the game. There's a ton of new and creative enemies here, and they're fun to fight. It's fun to traverse this area. There are a couple of problems with it, very minor ones overall. A large portion of the Marble Gallery can be completely skipped, and that's a shame because it contains some of the cooler enemies, but it's completely skippable. All it does is bring you back to the entrance and gives you no good items on the way there, so it's easily skippable. And in general, there's just not really any great items to find here. The only one of note seems to be the gravity boots. The fun factor in this area is really high. That's why it's so high up on the list. The fun factor is up there, man. There's a lot of detail put into this area too. Like I said, the pixel art is great, and they're the little bits like the eyeball in the window in the background just make this area seem more special to me. So it's more up here just because of the memorable nature of it. It's a very memorable area. Alright, this next one might seem kind of weird, especially putting it over its regular counterpart, and that is the Reverse Underground Caverns. The reason I'm putting this here is because it's a lot more challenging, and for me that makes it more interesting and memorable just because when I'm going through here, it's, oh man, this is the tough area with the fucking flower chicks throwing projectiles up your asshole. And this is also an inverted castle area with Lost Painting. Gotta love it. Fucking love Lost Painting. And it fits very well in this area. There's good enemy variety here. You got the little balloon pod things. You know, like I said, you got the flower chicks. And you got these knights that throw rocks at you. Which, combined with the flower chicks, presents a pretty challenging combo. You also get two of the best items in Symphony of the Night here. The first one being the Alucard shield, which is by far the best item in Symphony of the Night. It's Game Genie. It's Game Genie, man. The other item is a lot more balanced, but still extremely powerful, and that is the Osafune Katana. I hope I pronounced that right. It's really powerful. In terms of raw strength, it's very strong and does a lot of damage. If you're going through a no armor run and you don't have access to the Dragon Helm, it's actually one of the few weapons that can damage Galamoth at all. But other than these two items, it's kind of a barren area still. Again, it's too big. The underground caverns are just too big, so unless they put in like 10 epic items, unfortunately a lot of it is just going to be barren. Finally, there's also a boss fight here against the doppelganger, which is very good. It's flawed, but it's still very fun, like the other doppelganger fight. Oh, wait, hold up. Speaking of doppelganger fights, next up on our list is the Outer Wall. Gotta love this place. This is a very memorable location to me as a kid. A lot of that boils down to it having amazing atmosphere. In terms of atmosphere, I think this place has got to be number one. In terms of atmosphere and also attention to detail. Well, there's a lot of cool things to see here. Traveling down here to this lower area, there's kind of a little hut that kind of hangs off the outer wall. And you can look into a telescope here, which will show you the boatman, which you see later in the underground caverns. Again, there's a lot of cool details here. There's also a very fun boss battle with the doppelganger, which I think it's a little bit more interesting than the second one, mostly because at this point in the game, you have a lot less to work with. So you'll be fighting your clone who has the Alucard sword and the bat form and mist, and you have none of that shit, and that makes it a little bit more exciting to me. It gives you the feeling of you're up against something that is superior to you, and you still come out on top due to sheer wit. It's a very cool boss fight. Unfortunately, it's a little bit short. This area doesn't take too long to get through, and I think in terms of fun factor, it is outpaced a little bit by areas further up on the list, especially the second half of the Outer Wall. I don't think has amazing level design. It's just a very memorable location with a great boss fight, and that's why it's so high up. Alright, next up on the list is the Catacombs, which in my opinion just slightly outpaces the Outer Wall in terms of quality. It's a little bit longer, and it's also got a higher fun factor than the Outer Wall. It's got excellent music. One of the better songs in Symphony of the Night is in the Catacombs. There's some great music in this game. There's a ton of enemies here to fight, and they're all pretty distinct and interesting. The disc armor also used to be one of my favorite regular enemies in the game. That is until I found out you can just duck and attack, and he won't be able to hit you. Yeah, that's real. Look, it's real. It's happening right now. Jesus Christ. That is such an oversight. And finally, this area has a excellent boss fight. Very memorable boss fight against Granfaloon. As a kid, this boss fight kind of creeped me out a lot. I mean, it's just like dead, naked people surrounding an orb, and they fall and scream. It's kind of disturbing, and it still kind of retains that eerie factor with the bone floor and everything. Just a very memorable boss fight, even if it's a little bit too easy. Alright, at this point on the list, these picks start to get really tight. I could change any of these any day. They're all almost equal to each other. And we start this list off with the Royal Chapel. The most notable thing about this area for me is just the theming. Having a chapel in the Lord of Darkness's castle. It's kind of strange, but really cool. It almost kind of fits a little bit. In terms of level design, this is one of the best areas in the game. They put more of a focus on vertical platforming challenges, where you'll be climbing up these towers, and these crows will hit you off and you'll go flying down. I gotta say, the church, where they actually use 3D graphics, is very, very memorable. As a kid, this just looks so dope to me. The confession booth is also a very notable spot in this area. When you walk in, the music just completely changes. There's no movement going on. It's a very still area, and you sit down and you talk to spirits, and they sometimes will just go and confess to you, or maybe you'll talk to a priest or something like that. But then there's also these other ones that'll just come out, close the curtain, and then stab your ass. It's kind of funny to me now, but as a kid, this kind of creeped me out. Just the music is very unsettling here. Unfortunately, this area does have its problems. The boss fight here is kind of lame. There's also not a ton of great items to find here. In fact, I'm struggling to recall any really exceptional loot here. But the pros far outseed the cons. I love this area, man. It's so good. Alright, next up is the floating catacombs. The regular catacombs almost is kind of groovy, especially with the music going on, the skeletons and weird, goofy positions. But the floating catacombs is no joke. Once you enter this area, when that music goes in and the more red color palette, it gives off a real sense of danger. Like, you just need to get out. Like, we're done playing around here, man. It's time to get serious. This area is gonna be tough, and it is pretty tough. There's a few new enemies, and they can be very dangerous if you don't kill them fast. The thing that really makes this area for me and many other people is the boss fight against Galamoth. It's got to be at least a top 3 boss fight in this game. It's definitely the hardest boss fight in Symphony of the Night. It's like a massive beast that shows up with a lightning rod. It's such a crazy idea. Okay, getting close to the top here. Next up is the Reverse Coliseum. Some people might be kind of surprised that this area is so high up, but to me there are just a couple of things that make this one of the best areas in Symphony of the Night, and the first one is that it's extremely challenging. This might be the hardest area in Symphony of the Night. They do reuse the Minotaur and Werewolf, which you fight in the regular Coliseum, but they're a lot tankier, a lot harder, and they come in packs, which makes things really overwhelming for you. And if you don't do high enough DPS, they can really mess you up. They do a lot of damage. But the absolute highlight of this area, and I think one of the sole reasons that it's really this high up, is the boss fight against the Castlevania 3 clones. Not only do I think this is one of the best boss fights in the game, this has gotta be one of the best fights in Castlevania history. And I know you fucking normies. I know you normies are walking in with the Chrysogram or the Alucard shield and just fucking walking into them and pressing square. That's not how you do things here. That's not how we roll over on the Chid 255 channel. Okay, I'm going in with a goddamn broadsword and no armor. And if you do that, let me tell you, there's a lot of cool things about this fight. You have to watch out for 3 different characters all trying to attack you and kill you. And it's very difficult. Sypha kind of acts as a keep away with a very generous hitbox with the ice attack that kind of keeps you out, forces you closer to Trevor and Grant. Grant stays on the ceiling, so that if you're trying to duck Trevor's attacks, he'll come up from up top and throw a knife at you, which forces you to stand up and move. So it's very difficult to get around all 3 of them. You have to focus on one at a time. And the thing is that after you kill one character, the other 2 get more powerful. They start doing more attacks. And that is why, in my opinion, that's why this area is so high. It's just, the boss fight is incredible, man. One of the best boss fights in Castlevania history. Alright, here we are at the top 3 in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. These areas, since this is my favorite game of all time, these 3 areas really stand out to me as being an example in Metroidvania excellence. And the first one, the number 3 spot, is Olrox's Quarters. Start us off, one of the best themes and songs in Symphony of the Night. The classical music playing through the halls here is just absolutely amazing. Gives off a great sense of atmosphere. There's a good sense of mystery for this area because most of it is actually locked off until you get the bat. So you won't see all of it at first. So you'll be wondering, alright, who's Olrox and what's up in that ceiling there? Is that where I find him? And that is where you find him. There's a lot more to this area once you get up there. First of all, there's a dungeon with, like, you got these kind of spirit zombie-looking prisoners that come up to the bars and rattle the gates. As a kid, I thought that was so cool. And also kind of sad. I kind of felt bad for those guys. Like, Alucard, Open the door. Let him out. Let the man out. He wants to be free, damn it. Let his ass out. But no, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do it. There's also a huge outdoor segment with like this little town-looking area, which again, as a kid, was so cool to me. At the bottom, you have like these knights on horses, and a fountain that with the water, and it turns to blood, kind of like Castlevania Bloodlines. These attention to detail moments, again, it really helps an area become more memorable. And finally, at the very end of Olrox's quarters, who awaits you other than the man himself, Olrox. And doesn't disappoint. It's one of the best boss fights in Symphony of the Night. It starts out kind of deceptive. Like it's just a normal dude who floats around and throws skulls at you and stuff like that. But just when you think you've won, there really aren't many problems with this area. I can't really name any. I guess there is one, and that would probably be the bloody zombie reuse, which at this point they're a non-threat, and they're used quite a bit in the dungeon areas, and I don't understand it. But aside from that, near perfect. Okay, number 2 might come as a huge shock. I don't think anyone would really rank this area as high as me, but to me this is one of the most memorable areas in Metroidvania history, and that is the Anti-Chapel. Now, the reason this is so memorable to me, there's a lot of atmosphere to this place, but it's also many people's first exposure to the reverse castle. So as a kid, once I finally made it here and entered through those doors, yeah, sure, it was the same area as the Royal Chapel, the same layout, but it felt a lot darker, more gloomy. The enemies were a lot more dangerous, and Lost Painting really left an impression on me. It just gave it a sense of eerie but enticing atmosphere. This was just a great way to start off the reverse castle, and to be honest, if I had a choice in this world, I would make everyone start off going through the Anti-Chapel rather than the reverse clock tower. It's just a much better first impression of the inverted castle. Not only is the atmosphere really good here, the fun factor is really high for me. It presents a unique challenge, and it gets progressively more difficult the further into the chapel you go. By the end, you're at the stair room, and you have the archers clinging to the stairs, and again, the challenge is trying to reach them. They're at a slightly awkward angle that make it difficult to climb up and reach them. And the fun factor is there. The atmosphere is amazing. In fact, I think for many others, including myself, this is the area that is associated with Lost Painting. It just fits so well with this spot. And I guess the only complaint I would have is maybe the boss fight kind of sucks against Medusa. It's not great. If you duck, you're mostly safe, so you just have to crouch and attack. That seems to be a problem with a lot of enemies, just their weakness seems to be crouching and attacking. But other than that, the fun factor is really high, the atmosphere is great, it's just a very memorable location, a very great first impression of the inverted castle, and that's why it's number 2. Alright, number 1 on the list. I feel like it's not super controversial because this is an excellent area, but for me, I think this is just the place that does everything right, and that is the Colosseum. Let's start here. First of all, one of the best songs in the game with Wandering Ghosts, top 3 song in Symphony of the Night. The boss battle here is great. Again, not even Anti-Chapel had a great boss battle, but the Werewolf and Minotaur, super memorable fight, and can be really difficult if you skip into this area early. And that's another thing, you can skip into this area early. And that makes it a lot more interesting. You can make it as challenging as you want. You can go there early, you can go there later, but every time it's so fun to explore. It's a very open area, there's a lot of pathways, there's a ton of new enemies here, such as the Owl Knights, which are super memorable. Especially when you kill the owl, the knight goes over and he's like, oh, what did you do? Why? Oh, shit. And he's gonna go, then he's going ape shit. He's like fucking swinging all over the place. He's blinded by his rage for the owl dying. I felt bad as a kid doing that to the guy. I mean, shit. Alucard's a menace. There's also these blade skeletons, which are pretty hard to avoid. They jump all over the place and are kind of tanky at times too. Really interesting enemies. They do interesting things. Again, there's a lot of details injected in this area that just give it more personality. Like, who can forget that blood-soaked room where you pick up the cape? What an what an interesting location to find that. They don't just throw it anywhere. There's a room dedicated just to that item. You also have this weird fountain room with a gravekeeper, and what is he guarding? Green tea. Yeah, he's a big fan of green tea. And to top it off, this also probably has the most interesting story beat in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and that is revealing that Richter is secretly evil. This area it really does nothing wrong. It's perfect. I love it. I've always loved it since I was a kid. It's always a fun place to visit. I skip here early intentionally, like all the time. It's just, I want to get to the Coliseum as fast as possible. So it's the best area in my favorite game of all time. Of course, I'm going to be kind of hyped about it. It's awesome. But anyway, this is going to be a very long video. And if you made it this far, thanks for checking out my list. Hopefully, wasn't too controversial for you. I know we may have differing opinions. There's like 30 areas to list here, so of course we're not going to perfectly line up. But hopefully you found it interesting. Again, I don't think anyone has done this kind of video. I think I might be the first one to the ticket, although feel free to prove me wrong. But with that said, this video is already long enough. Very long video. It's going to take a while to edit this one, but happy 5th anniversary to this channel. It's been a long time making these videos, and hey, we're almost at 100 subscribers. 100 subscribers. 100 people said, this random guy screaming into his mic about Castlevania Symphony of the Night, I want to see that. I want to see more of that. And so I thank you. Really. Thanks for listening to me ramble. It's been fun. Here, cheers to 5 more years, guys. Alright, you take care.